be me. Arshaba, operations manager at large, logistics and warehousing company with 180 employees, had worked my way up from floor supervisor to operations manager over 5 years through dedication. Company had physical requirements for warehouse roles. Had to be able to lift 50 pounds repeatedly throughout shift. Also required to move quickly. Work 10-hour shifts on feet. Handle physical demands of warehouse environment. Noticed that physical standards were enforced strictly for male workers, but seemed more flexible for women. Women on warehouse floor were given lighter duty assignments, shorter shifts, help with heavy items. Male workers had to meet full physical requirements or they'd be let go for not being able to perform job. Posted on social media about this double standard. Said it was sexist to have different standards based on gender. That if jobs required certain physical capabilities, then those requirements should apply equally to everyone. Said treating women like they couldn't handle same physical work as men was patronizing and discriminatory. Post got 28K likes, with feminists commenting, "Yes, exactly. We're just as capable as men physically. Stop coddling women and treating us like we're weak and fragile creatures who need special accommodations." Men commenting that physical differences between sexes were biological reality, not social construct. I responded saying that was sexist thinking. Plenty of women could meet same physical standards as men. Had meeting with company leadership about standardizing physical requirements across all genders for warehouse roles. CEO named Robert looked concerned and said, "We've had this 2-tier system for years without issues." I said it's discriminatory and opens company to legal liability. We need one standard that applies to everyone. VP of HR named Patricia said, "We implemented flexible standards for women to increase female participation. Many qualified women couldn't meet male standards, but could still do valuable work with accommodations." I said that's exactly the problem. You're assuming women need accommodations, which is sexist assumption. If someone can't meet physical requirements of job, they shouldn't be in that job, regardless of gender. Director of Operations named Mark said many of our female warehouse workers are excellent employees. They'd be gone if we enforced same standard on them that we enforce on male workers. I said then they shouldn't have been hired for roles they couldn't physically perform. That's the issue. After heated discussion, leadership agreed to implement uniform physical standards across all warehouse positions. Starting next quarter, all warehouse employees would need to meet same requirements. Lift 50 Pfund. Work full shifts. Those who couldn't meet standards would be reassigned to other roles or let go if no suitable positions available. Felt vindicated that I'd pushed company toward actual equality instead of patronizing separate standards. Posted about victory on social media. Said convince company to eliminate sexist double standards. Now everyone would be held to same physical requirements regardless of gender. Real equality achieved. Got thousands of supportive comments from feminists praising the change toward actual equal treatment. Few weeks later, new policy was announced to all warehouse employees at mandatory company meeting, explained that physical standards would now be uniform. Everyone must demonstrate ability to lift 50 pounds repeatedly, must be able to work full 10-hour shifts, meet productivity quotas, handle all physical aspects of warehouse work. Saw concern on faces of several female employees who'd been working with accommodations for years. One woman, named Maria, raised hand and asked, "What happens if we can't meet new standards?" I explained we'd work with people for 90 days to meet standards. After that would need reassignment or separation. Another woman named Jennifer asked if there would be any exceptions for medical conditions or limitations. I said medical accommodations would still apply per ADA. But gender would no longer be basis for different standards. Could see many women looking worried, but several men looking satisfied that standards would finally be equal. Following week, physical assessments began for all warehouse employees. To establish baseline capabilities, test required lifting 50 pounds boxes repeatedly for 30 minutes. Completing obstacle course. Simulating warehouse floor. Carrying 40 pounds upstairs. Demonstrating ability to maintain pace over extended period without breaks. All 180 warehouse employees would be tested over 2-week period, with results determining their status. First day of testing, watched as male employees mostly passed without significant difficulty. They'd been meeting these standards all along, so testing was just formality for most of them. Then female employees began testing, and results were concerning. Many struggled with weight requirements. Maria, who'd been an excellent employee for 8 years, couldn't lift 50 pounds more than few times. Jennifer made it through lifting portion, but couldn't maintain required pace over full 3-0 period. Another woman named Susan could handle weight but had stamina issues during extended testing period. By end of first week of testing, 23 out of 34 female warehouse workers had failed to meet standards. These were good employees with excellent performance reviews who'd been valuable team members for years. But under new uniform standards, they didn't qualify for warehouse positions they'd successfully held. Started feeling uncomfortable about policy I'd pushed for as I saw a real human impact on actual people. Second week of testing continued with similar results. Total of 29 out of 34 women failed to meet standards. That was 85% of female warehouse workforce who would need reassignment or termination under new policy. Meanwhile, only 3 out of 146 male warehouse workers failed to meet standards they'd been meeting all along. Called Meeting with HR to discuss results and what they meant for workforce composition going forward. Patricia looked at me seriously and said, "This is exactly what we warned would happen with uniform standards. We're about to lose nearly our entire female warehouse workforce because you insisted on equal requirements." I said, "If they can't meet job requirements, they shouldn't be in those jobs. That's what equality means." She said, "These women have been excellent employees for years. Productivity numbers prove they were performing well. Customer satisfaction scores were high. Safety records were good. They were doing the job successfully, just not meeting arbitrary physical standard. You insisted on enforcing equally across genders." I said it's not arbitrary. It's the actual physical requirement of warehouse work lifting and moving heavy items. Mark from operations joined meeting. He said this is going to devastate our workforce and our operations. These 29 women combined represent 15% of our total warehouse capacity. We can't just lose them overnight. Training new workers takes months. We have major contracts that depend on current workforce capacity. I said we'll have 90-day transition period for them to meet standards or find other positions. He said 90 days isn't enough time to develop physical capabilities they don't currently have. Many of these women are in their 40s and 50s. They're not going to suddenly develop ability to lift 50 pounds repeatedly. This isn't about training or effort. It's about biological reality that you're refusing to acknowledge. I said biological differences between sexes are overstated. With proper training, anyone can meet these standards. Patricia said, that's simply not true. There are real physiological differences in muscle mass and upper body strength. Average woman has 45 to 50% less upper body strength than average man. That's not social construct. That's biology. Started feeling defensive. Said, we can't have different standards based on gender. That's literal discrimination. She said we had reasonable accommodations that allowed qualified women to contribute based on their capabilities. Now you've eliminated those accommodations in name of equality and we're going to lose valuable employees. Next day, CEO Robert called me into his office, looking very serious about the situation. He said, Board is concerned about losing 15% of warehouse capacity in 90 days. It could impact major contracts. I said, We should have been hiring people who could meet standards all along. This is correcting past mistakes." He said, "Those weren't mistakes. Those were qualified employees contributing successfully within their capabilities. Your policy change is creating crisis where none existed before in name of ideological purity about equality." I said, "It's not ideological purity. It's actual equality. Same standards for everyone regardless of gender." He said, "At what cost, though? We're about to lose nearly 30 good employees and destabilize our operations." Board is questioning whether this change was necessary or beneficial to company, or if it's causing more harm. I said, "Sometimes doing the right thing is difficult. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it." He looked at me seriously and said, "Board wants you to reconsider this policy before 90 days are up." Over next few weeks, worked with women who failed assessments to help them meet physical standards, brought in personal trainers, created workout programs, gave them resources and time to improve capabilities. Maria trained hard for 6 weeks. Improved significantly, but still couldn't consistently lift 50 pounds repeatedly. Jennifer worked with trainer on stamina and endurance. Got better, but still couldn't maintain required pace. Susan pushed herself to exhaustion trying to meet standards. Ended up injuring her back in training. Watched these women who were excellent employees struggle and failed, despite enormous effort and dedication. Started questioning whether I'd been right about biology being overstated versus social construct. These women were trying their absolute hardest with professional training and still couldn't meet male standards. Week 10 of 90-day period had an emotional meeting with Maria, who'd been with company for 8 years. She was crying, saying she'd given everything to this company, been loyal employee, done excellent work. Now, she was being forced out because she couldn't lift arbitrary weight that wasn't even required for her specific tasks. I said, "Weight requirement is part of warehouse work. Everyone needs to be able to handle all aspects." She said, "But my role was inventory management and quality control. I rarely needed to lift anything heavy. Other workers would help when heavy lifting was needed. And I contributed other valuable skills to team. Now I'm losing my job because of standard that isn't actually relevant to work I was successfully performing." Left that meeting feeling terrible. Started reviewing job descriptions for all affected women's positions. Realized many of them had specialized roles where heavy lifting wasn't frequent requirement of their actual work. They'd been performing their jobs successfully for years without meeting male physical standards. Had meeting with Patricia to discuss this finding and what it meant for the policy I'd implemented. She said, "This is what we tried to tell you. Women were in appropriate roles based on their capabilities. They weren't doing jobs that required constant heavy lifting. They were doing valuable work suited to their strengths. By imposing uniform standard, you're eliminating positions that women were successfully performing." I said, "But job classification is warehouse worker that should have consistent requirements across all positions." She said, "Or we could have nuanced job classifications that reflect actual physical demands of specific roles. Not all warehouse work is identical. Some positions require more physical strength. Others require different skills. We could restructure job titles and requirements to match actual work being performed rather than broad categories." This made sense, but felt like backtracking on equality principle I'd been so adamant about enforcing. With 2 weeks left in 90-day period, only 3 of 29 women had managed to meet new physical standards. That meant 26 women would be losing their jobs in 2 weeks unless policy changed or exceptions made. Called emergency meeting with leadership to discuss options before mass terminations became reality. Roberts said, "Board has authorized me to offer you choice. We can proceed with policy you demanded, lose 26 employees, face operational crisis, potentially lose major contracts due to capacity shortage, or you can acknowledge policy was misguided and we can return to previous accommodation system." I sat there feeling trapped between ideological commitment to equality and practical reality of consequences. asked, what would happen to 3 women who had met new standards if we reverted to old policy? Patricia said they'd be recognized and rewarded for achievement, but everyone could continue working. Asked what message it would send about equality if we backtracked on uniform standards. Mark said it would send message that company values practical outcomes over ideological purity, that we recognize biological differences exist and can be accommodated without being discriminatory. I said, but that's exactly the sexist assumption I was trying to eliminate from company culture. Robert said, is it sexist to acknowledge that average woman has different physical capabilities than average man, or is it sexist to impose standards that eliminate qualified women from roles they were performing successfully? This question hit me hard because I didn't have good answer that aligned with my stated beliefs. Spent weekend agonizing over decision, reviewing everything I'd said about equality and uniform standards. Realized that my policy was about to put 26 women out of work, many of them single mothers with families. These were real people whose lives would be devastated by policy I'd pushed for based on principle. Monday morning, went to Robert's office and said, I need to acknowledge I was wrong about uniform standards. He looked surprised and said, explain what you mean by wrong in this context. I said, I was so focused on equality as identical treatment that I ignored biological realities and practical outcomes. These women were doing their job successfully. My policy didn't improve anything. It just hurt good employees. He said, so, you're recommending we revert to previous accommodation system with different standards? I said yes, but with better job classifications that reflect actual physical demands of specific positions. So, it's not gender-based accommodation, but role-based requirements that happen to allow more women to qualify. He said, and that's exactly what we had before. You demanded changes. You've come full circle. I said, I know, but framing it differently matters. It's about job requirements, not gender categories. Called company-wide meeting to announce policy change before 90-day deadline hit, explained that we'd be restructuring job classifications to better reflect actual physical demands of specific roles. Some positions would require ability to lift 50 pounds regularly. Others would have different requirements. Employees would be assigned to positions matching their demonstrated capabilities and skills. Saw visible relief on faces of women who'd been facing termination in few days under original policy. Also saw some disappointment from male workers who'd been looking forward to uniform standards. After meeting, several women thanked me for changing course. Even though it meant admitting I'd been wrong, Maria hugged me, crying, saying, thank you for saving my job. I was terrified about how I'd support my family. Jennifer said she knew I'd meant well, but policy would have destroyed lives of good workers. Felt mixture of relief that I'd prevented harm and shame, that I'd created crisis in first place. Posted about experience on social media. Said I'd been wrong about demanding identical physical standards. That I'd learned biological differences between sexes were real, and accommodating them wasn't discrimination. That equality didn't always mean identical treatment when people had different capabilities and strengths. Got absolutely destroyed in comments by feminists who'd supported my original position. They said I'd betrayed feminist principles by admitting women couldn't meet same standards as men. That I'd set women back decades by acknowledging biological differences between sexes. One comment said, you've confirmed every sexist belief about women being weaker and less capable than men. Another said, you were right the first time. Women who can't meet standards shouldn't be in those jobs. These comments hurt, but I knew I'd made right decision to prevent 26 women from losing their livelihoods. Also got comments from people saying they'd tried to tell me this would happen. But I wouldn't listen. Men saying biological differences are real and pretending they don't exist doesn't help anyone. Women saying they'd experienced similar revelation about equality, not meaning identical treatment. Started doing research on physical differences between sexes and how to accommodate them fairly. Found extensive scientific literature on upper body strength differences bone density, muscle mass distribution. Average untrained woman has 52% of upper body strength of average untrained man. That's significant difference. No amount of training would make most women as strong as most men in upper body strength. This wasn't sexist opinion. It was measurable biological reality that I'd been denying existed. Started consulting with companies about developing fair physical standards that didn't discriminate, taught framework of role-based requirements rather than gender-based accommodations. If role genuinely requires ability to lift 50 pounds repeatedly, that's legitimate requirement for that specific role. But not all roles require same physical capabilities. Can structure positions around different strengths. This allowed companies to have diverse workforce without lowering standards for positions that truly needed physical capabilities. 6 months after policy reversal, did analysis of warehouse workforce composition and performance. We had 168 employees in warehouse, 31 women and 137 men working in roles suited to their capabilities. Performance metrics were strong across all positions. Customer satisfaction remained high. Safety record excellent. Hadn't lost operational capacity or contract fulfillment ability by maintaining diverse workforce. Women were concentrated in roles requiring less frequent heavy lifting, more precision work. Quality control. Men were concentrated in roles requiring more physical strength, heavy lifting, loading, and unloading. This distribution reflected biological realities, while allowing both groups to contribute based on their strengths. 1 year after demanding same physical standards, I did presentation to leadership about lessons learned, acknowledged that my ideological commitment to identical treatment had nearly caused significant harm, that biological differences between sexes are real and accommodating them is not the same as discrimination. That equality should mean equal opportunity to contribute based on individual capabilities, not identical requirements. Robert said, "This has been valuable learning experience for you and for company as whole. We've developed better job classification system that's more fair and efficient than what we had before. Your initial push for change led to better outcome, even though specific policy you advocated was wrong. Started speaking at conferences about my experience, demanding same physical standards than being unable to meet them. Wait. I hadn't actually been tested myself. That was oversight in how I'd implemented policy. Robert pulled me aside after presentation and said, "Board wants all managers to meet standards for roles they oversee. If you're going to manage warehouse operations, you should demonstrate you can meet physical requirements." Felt my stomach drop because I'd never actually tested whether I personally could meet the standards I'd imposed. Week later, took same physical assessment I'd required of all warehouse employees to prove my capabilities. Started with 50 pounds box lifts, managed 5 repetitions before my arms were shaking, and I had to stop. Standard required 30 repetitions over 30-minute period. I'd done 5 before completely failing. Tried obstacle course and made it through, but pace was slow. Couldn't maintain required speed over full course. Stamina test broke me completely. Lasted 12 minutes of required 30 minutes before having to quit from exhaustion. Sat there in testing room facing reality that I had failed the exact standards I demanded everyone else meet. I couldn't do the work I'd insisted everyone be capable of doing, or lose their jobs. If my own policy had applied to me, I would have been terminated for failure to meet physical requirements. Had devastating meeting with Robert to discuss my test results and what they meant for my credibility. He said, "You demanded standards you couldn't personally meet, then tried to enforce them on other women. How do you think Maria feels knowing you would have fired her for failing standards you also failed?" I started crying, said, "I never thought about whether I could meet them myself. Just that they should be uniform." He said, "That's the problem with ideological purity disconnected from practical reality and self-awareness. You created policy that would have devastated lives without even knowing if you could meet your own standards." This was most humiliating moment of my professional life, confronting my own hypocrisy and ignorance. apologized to Maria and other women who'd failed assessments, told them about my own failure. Maria was gracious but said, "I wish you'd tested yourself before putting us through that terror and stress. We all knew we couldn't meet those standards. That's why we were so scared of losing our jobs. You could have known, too, if you'd bothered to check, instead of just assuming biological differences didn't matter." Started therapy to process shame and guilt about nearly destroying people's lives over ideological commitment. Therapist asked why I'd been so invested in denying biological differences between sexes existed. I said I thought acknowledging them was sexist. Was giving ammunition to people who wanted to discriminate. Therapist said, "But denying reality doesn't make it go away. It just makes you unable to deal with it effectively. You can acknowledge differences exist while still fighting against using those differences to discriminate unfairly. That's more honest and ultimately more effective than pretending everyone is physically identical." 2 years after demanding same physical standards, did final presentation to company about lessons learned, shared complete story, including my own failure to meet standards I'd imposed on others. Talked about learning that equality means equal opportunity and respect, not identical capabilities or treatment, that accommodating biological differences isn't discrimination, it's recognition of reality, that ideological purity disconnected from practical outcomes can cause real harm to real people. Several employees thanked me afterward for honesty and vulnerability in admitting my mistakes. One said, "It takes courage to publicly acknowledge you were wrong about something you'd been so certain about." Current reflection, 3 years after demanding same physical standards for everyone, regardless of gender, learned that biological sex differences are real, and pretending they don't exist doesn't help anyone. That equality should be about equal opportunity to contribute based on individual strengths, not identical requirements. That accommodating different capabilities isn't discrimination. It's practical recognition of human diversity. That ideological commitment to identical treatment can actually harm the people it's meant to help. Most importantly, learn to test my own capabilities before imposing standards on others. That's what I learned from demanding same physical standards and being unable to meet them myself. From nearly firing 26 good employees over principle I hadn't thought through practically, from having to admit I was wrong and change course before causing irreversible harm, that's my complete story about equality. Biology. And learning that identical doesn't always mean equal. 4 years after my failed assessment started, nonprofit helping companies develop fair standards, acknowledging human differences, called it Practical Equality Initiative. To first major client was manufacturing company, facing same issues I'd created. Female CEO had implemented identical physical standards and was watching 40% of female workforce fail assessments. Brought me in to share my story before she made same mistakes I had made. Suggested she take assessment herself before proceeding with policy to see what she was demanding. She failed even worse than I had. Couldn't lift required weight, even once. Lasted only 8 minutes. This completely changed her perspective on what she'd been about to implement company-wide. We developed role-based requirements matching actual job demands, not gender ideology. 6 months later, she'd retained entire female workforce while maintaining all performance standards. Started teaching workshops called Biology, Isn't Bigotry about Physical Differences in Workplace Equity. Controversial title got pushed back, but workshops filled immediately with HR professionals needing practical guidance. One participant said, "I've been terrified to acknowledge sex differences because I'd be called sexist. But pretending they don't exist creates impossible situations where women fail and feel inadequate." Started getting interviewed about balancing equality ideals with biological realities in workplace. Journalists asked, "Don't you worry, you're giving ammunition to people who want to exclude women." I said, "People who want to discriminate will do so regardless. But people wanting genuine equity need honest framework. We serve no one by pretending humans don't have physical differences based on biological sex." My former company, 5 years later, became model for sex-informed workplace equity policies, They'd restructured all jobs based on actual physical demands, not assumed gender categories. Result was 35% female warehouse workforce, highest in industry, with excellent retention and performance. Robert credited my initial push, saying even though specific policy was wrong, examining practices led to better system. Recently spoke at Feminist conference, knowing I'd face hostile audience given my current positions. Shared complete story, including my humiliating failure to meet standards I demanded from others. Young woman said, "You're betraying feminism by saying women can't do what men do." I said, "I'm not saying that. I'm saying average woman has different physical capabilities than average man. That's biology, not betrayal. We can fight for equality while acknowledging factual reality. We don't help women by setting them up to fail arbitrary standards designed around male physiology." Older woman stood and said, "Thank you. I'm five-year-old construction manager who can't lift what young men lift. But I'm excellent at my job. Your framework lets me acknowledge that without feeling inferior." This got applause, showing how many women struggled with same conflict I had experienced. Started collaborating with sports medicine researchers, studying performance differences between athletes. Data showed even elite female athletes had significantly less upper body strength than elite males. This wasn't controversial in sports, but became controversial discussing workplace capabilities. Researchers said, "We've known for decades male and female bodies have different strengths and limitations. Your work helps translate sports science into practical workplace applications that acknowledge reality." Recently took job as VP of operations at logistics company. Was upfront about my history. CEO said, "That's why we want you. You learned from failure and changed your approach completely. Implemented same role-based framework. Company now has 40% female operations workforce with excellent metrics. Women distributed based on individual capabilities. Some meet heavy lifting standards. Others excel in different roles." Final reflection, 5 years after demanding same physical standards and failing to meet them myself. Learned equality doesn't require denying biological reality or pretending everyone has identical capabilities. That accommodating physical differences isn't discrimination. It's practical recognition of human diversity, that role-based requirements achieve equity while acknowledging not all bodies are physically identical. Most importantly, learn to examine my own capabilities before imposing standards on others. That's everything I learned from demanding same standards. Failing them myself, nearly destroying lives, then helping others build actually equitable workplaces, acknowledging both equal dignity and unequal capabilities. That's my complete journey from ideological feminist to practical equity advocate who learned the hard way.